Today I'm doing an informative speech on the history of women's sports. Throughout history, women have achieved a ton of goals in the world of sports. Despite all of these achievements, they have still had to face many challenges. With female athletes having to face these challenges, they have overcome many obstacles, and women's sports have significantly evolved over the years. Prior to Title IX in 1870, women just played recreational sports rather than competitive sports. It was very informal and without rules and just emphasized physical activity. Even though physical activity was not encouraged because during menstruation, women were periodically weakened and it was labeled as hazardous. In 1874, Dr. Edward Clark published a book called Sex and Education, or A Fair Chance for Girls, which sparked a ton of debates. College sports for women have been largely unrecognized by historians. Competition for women in college included intramural, club, or sorority matches with very few competitive games. In the early 1900s, the Committee of Women's Athletics and the American Physical Education Association endorsed programs of broad participation for women. During the passage of Title IX, there were still many issues for women. Before Title IX passed, there were still a lot of barriers for women to progress and succeed in society. They were still facing discrimination, and athletic scholarships for women were virtually non-existent. With sports having issues, there were still issues in education. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 made it illegal to discriminate on different things, but made no mention of discrimination based on sex. By the early 1970s, girls and women continued to face discrimination and unequal treatment in many areas. Women were included in the Civil Rights Act only in Title VII, an amendment that addressed equal employment opportunities but did not apply to educational institutions among areas. During the passage of Title IX in 1972, President Richard Nixon agreed the Education Amendments Act of 1972. Title IX then became mandatory in 1978. Between 1970 and 1978, the law had a huge impact on women's sports, and 6 times as many high school girls were now playing a sport. With the after effects of Title IX, there was a ton of success in women's sports. 3 million additional high school girls were now playing a sport following Title IX's passage. Access to women's athletics increased, and so did its health benefits, and it also decreased health risks. Women now make up 44% of the NCAA, and 60% of girls now play a sport in high school. In 1971, 90% of women's collegiate teams were coached by a woman. There are still issues evolving today, as high school boys still receive 1 million more chances for scholarships rather than U.S. high school girls. Just a few weeks ago, women were still fighting against biological males playing in women's sports, as President Trump just passed this law to where biological males were not allowed to play in women's sports just a few weeks ago. Sports have come a long way since before Title IX was put into place for men and women. And women are still striving today. Millions of people now watch and attend women's sporting events. As a female athlete, I'm so glad that Title IX was created and that I am in an era where people are now watching women's sports and giving us the opportunities that we deserve.